Hello and welcome to the second video of Java Persistence API tutorial. In this video, we are going to explore in detail the entity managers, and more specific, we are going to learn how to create the persistence.xml file, how to create an entity and store it inside the database, how to update an entity, how to find an entity, and last but not least, how to delete an entity. We are going to use the student entity defined in the previous video in order to create, update, find, and delete a student. Let's start creating the persistent.xml file. As I said, we are using the student entity defined in the previous video. It's a simple entity with an ID, first name and last name. Under the resources metainf folder, I'm going to create the persistent.xml file. This file plays an important role in the concept of JPA. We are going to use this file to register the database and specific the entity student class. The persistent unit tag is defined with a specific name for the JPA persistence. Our persistent unit will have the name student PU, student persistent unit. The properties tag define all the properties, and property tag define each property such as a database registration, URL, driver, username, and password. The class tag defines entity class with a package name, in our case, the student entity. Let's define which is the URL of our database, the username and password. In this tutorial, we are going to use the H2 database as database. You can find the process installation of the database inside the previous video, JPA Introduction. I have a lot of possibility to choose the JDBC URL. I decided to use the first one, database, as file in my home directory. Let's take the URL, the username and password, and update the persistent.xml file. At this moment, as you can see, we don't have any kind of student table. Let's move on and learn how to persist an entity inside the database. I'm going to create a new Java class called createStudent.java and put the main method. The goal is to create the entity manager in order to perform the persist operation. To do so, the first action is to create the EntityManagerFactory from the persistence student PU created 2 minutes ago. Then, using the EntityManagerFactory, we can create our entity manager. We want to persist a student, and to do that, we need to begin an EntityTransaction. Now let's create a new student putting the first name and the last name. Finally, we can use the Entity Manager to persist our first student inside the database. In the end, let's commit our transaction and close both the Entity Manager and the EntityManagerFactory. Let's run it. Inside the log, we can see the JPA has created for us the student table and insert our first student. But in the end, it dropped the database because we specified inside the persistence.xml file the action create and drop. Let's fix it. Just changes the value from create and drop to just create and run it again. Done. And you can see now inside our HU database we have the student table with our first student. Let's continue and learn how to find the student entity inside the database. I'm going to create another Java class called findStudent.java with the main method. The process is the same that we saw 2 minutes ago, meaning taking the entity manager in order to perform the find operation inside the database. In this case, we don't need to use the EntityTransaction, but just the find function of the entity manager. Let's run it. As you can see in the log, JPA has created again the table student. The reason why we use the create value inside the persistence.xml file. Let's remove it and run again the create student and then the find student class. Well done! We have found our student. Let's check the database before move on. Let's continue and learn how to update the student entity. I'm going to create another Java class called updateStudent.java with the main method. The code that we are going to use is the same as createStudent.java, with just the line to find our student inside the database before updating the first name and the last name. Let's run it. Well done! We have learned how to update the student entity. Let's check the database before continuing. The last operation to learn is how to delete the student entity inside the database. As usual, I'm going to create the delete student Java class with the main method, and I'm going to use the EntityManager and the EntityTransaction to perform the delete operation. But before doing that, I need to find the student inside the database. We're going to use the remove function of the EntityManager to delete the student entity. Let's run it and check the database. Well done again. We've also learned how to delete the student entity. We have learned how to use the persistence operation to store and load entities inside the database. Before finishing the video, I want to show you a good and clean way to refactor our code. I want to reduce the repository class and add some unit tests using the H2 in-memory database. Let's follow my steps. Let's use student repository in our main method. Well done! We now have our clean student repository class to perform all persistence operations of the student entity. Let's complete the tutorial just adding some unit tests for our student repository class. Inside the unit test, I'm going to use the H2 in-memory database. we have completed the second video of JPA tutorial, where we have explored in the detail the Entity Manager and more specifically how to create the persistence.xml file, how to create, update, find and delete an entity in the database. Inside the description of this video, you can find the link to the GitHub repository. I hope you liked and enjoyed the video. If you have any question or doubts, write to me inside the comment section below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated with a new video that I will upload. See you in the next video of a JPA tutorial. Bye.